Texas, August 1945. A train screamed through the desert heat, carrying 63 German women toward a future none of them could imagine. Inside one of the boxcars, Margaret Schiller pressed her hands against her swollen belly and prayed no one would notice. 7 months pregnant, a prisoner of war, and carrying a secret that could destroy everything she had survived for. The American guards counted heads at each stop, checked papers, logged names. But they never looked close enough. Not yet. The rails hummed beneath the wheels like a low growl, steady and relentless. Margaret sat pressed against the wooden slats of the POW car, feeling each jolt through her spine, each lurch forward sending waves of nausea up her throat. Around her, 62 other German women swayed with the motion, their faces gray with exhaustion, their eyes hollow from weeks at sea and days on American trains. Some slept sitting up, others stared at nothing, lost in memories of homes that no longer existed. She adjusted her coat, oversized, borrowed from a Red Cross station in New York, and pulled it tighter across her middle. The fabric was thick wool, inappropriate for Texas heat, but necessary. Beneath it, her belly pressed hard against her dress, round and insistent. 7 months. Maybe more. She had stopped counting weeks ago, back when they were still in the camp near Bremen, when the Reich was crumbling and everyone was trying to survive one more day. The woman beside her, Greta, shifted and groaned in her sleep. Greta was 40, maybe older, with hands that bore the scars of factory work and eyes that had seen too much. She had been kind to Margaret during the Atlantic crossing, sharing water when the rations ran low, holding her hair back when she vomited over the side of the ship. But Margaret had told her nothing, could tell her nothing. Outside the window, America rolled past like a dream. Endless sky, flat earth stretching to horizons that seemed impossible after the cramped valleys and bombed cities of Germany. Occasionally a farmhouse appeared white against the brown land, or a windmill turning lazily in the heat. No rubble here, no craters, no burned-out husks of buildings where families had hidden in basements. Just space. Terrible, empty, peaceful space. The train lurched again, harder this time, and Margaret's hand flew to her belly. Inside, the baby kicked. Strong, insistent kicks that said it was alive, that it wanted to survive too. She closed her eyes and breathed through her mouth, counting seconds the way the midwife back home had taught her mother. 1, 2, 3. The nausea passed. An American guard walked through the car, young and sunburned, his rifle slung over his shoulder like an afterthought. He glanced at the women with the bored indifference of someone who had been doing this too long. Margaret kept her face blank, her coat pulled tight, her breathing steady. He moved on. She thought of Klaus. Always Klaus. His face the last time she saw him, thinner than she remembered, his Wehrmacht uniform hanging loose on his frame. They had been married 3 weeks when he was sent to the Eastern Front. 3 weeks of a life they thought they would have forever. The baby was conceived during his last leave, February 1945, when Berlin was already burning and everyone knew the end was coming. He had held her in the darkness of her family's cellar and whispered that they would survive this, that Germany would rebuild, that their child would grow up in peace. She had believed him. Had to believe him. Now he was missing. Probably dead. The Eastern Front swallowed men whole, left no records, no graves, just vast frozen nothing where armies had once marched. And she was here, pregnant with his child, crossing a country that had been Germany's enemy, heading toward a camp whose name she could barely pronounce. Camp Huntsville, Texas. The train began to slow. Through the window, Margaret saw the camp materialize out of the heat shimmer like a mirage. Guard towers, wire fences stretching in perfect lines, barracks arranged in neat rows. Beyond the fences, more flatness, more sky, more of this strange American emptiness that made her heart ache for the tight valleys of the Rhine. The train stopped with a shriek of brakes. Steam hissed, doors rattled open. "Raus, alle raus!" The German words came from an American sergeant who spoke with a thick accent, butchering the vowels. "Out! Everyone out!" The women stood, stiff and aching, and began filing toward the doors. Margaret waited until the car was nearly empty before standing. Her legs trembled. The baby pressed down on her bladder with sudden urgent force. She gripped the seat back and willed herself to move. Outside, the heat hit like a physical blow. The sun blazed overhead, so bright it turned the world white. Margaret stepped down from the train, her coat wrapped tight despite the sweat already forming on her neck, and joined the line of women standing in the dust. American soldiers moved among them, checking papers, counting heads, barking orders in English that most of the women did not understand. Margaret kept her head down, her arms folded over her belly. Around her, the other women shuffled and whispered. Some cried quietly. Others stood rigid, refusing to show weakness. A jeep pulled up in a cloud of dust. An officer stepped out, tall, weathered, with a face that suggested he had spent most of his life outdoors. He conferred with the sergeant, glanced at a clipboard, then addressed the women in broken but understandable German. "Welcome to Camp Huntsville. You are prisoners of war, but you will be treated according to Geneva Convention. You work, you obey rules, you receive food and shelter, verstehen?" A few women nodded. Most just stared. The officer continued. "Medical inspection tomorrow morning. All prisoners must report to infirmary. Required by military regulation." He paused, let the words sink in. "Inspection includes physical examination. No exceptions." Margaret's heart stopped. Medical examination, physical, no exceptions. The world tilted. She locked her knees and forced herself to breathe. In, out, in, out. Around her, the other women began moving toward the barracks, following guards who gestured with their rifles. She moved with them, one foot in front of the other, the coat heavy as lead, the secret inside her pressing down with the weight of everything she had survived. That night, in Barrack 7, Margaret lay on a thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. Around her, 60 women breathed in the darkness, some snoring, some crying softly, some whispering in German about what tomorrow might bring. The air was thick and hot, even with the windows open. Mosquitoes hummed against the screens. Greta was in the bunk beside her. After lights out, she had whispered across the darkness, "Are you all right? You looked ill on the train." Margaret had said yes, just tired, just the journey. Greta had accepted this and said nothing more. But lying there in the heat, feeling the baby move inside her, Margaret knew that tomorrow everything would end. The examination would reveal what the coat had hidden. The Americans would discover she was pregnant. And then what? Would they send her back to Germany, to the Soviet zone where women were being raped and murdered? Would they separate her from the child? Put her in isolation? She had heard stories about pregnant prisoners, about babies born in camps, about American regulations that made no sense but were enforced anyway. She pressed both hands to her belly and felt the baby kick against her palms. Strong. Alive. Klaus's child. The only piece of him left in the world. She would not let them take it. Morning came too soon. Sunlight flooded through the windows, harsh and unforgiving. Women rose, dressed in the clothes they had been issued. Plain cotton dresses, too large or too small, American sizes that fit no one properly, and lined up outside the barracks as ordered. Margaret kept her coat on despite the heat. Other women looked at her strangely but said nothing. The infirmary was a low concrete building at the camp's edge, surrounded by more wire fencing, and guarded by soldiers who looked bored in the morning heat. Inside, it smelled of disinfectant and sweat. American nurses moved efficiently between rooms, their white uniforms crisp and clean, their faces neutral. They had done this before. Processed prisoners, checked for disease, logged the living. A nurse called names from a list. Schiller, Margarete. Margaret stood, her legs shook. She followed the nurse into an examination room where a doctor waited, middle-aged, gray-haired, with tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He gestured to a chair. "Sit, please." His German was better than most. "This is routine examination. Health check. I need you to remove coat." Margaret's hands tightened on the coat's edges. I am cold. The doctor raised an eyebrow. Outside, the temperature was already approaching 90 degrees. Remove coat, please. Doctor's orders. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her mind during the long nights on the ship, had imagined a dozen ways to refuse, to deflect, to run. But sitting there in the bright examination room with the nurse blocking the door and the doctor waiting with professional patience, all her rehearsals crumbled to nothing. She stood. Slowly, mechanically, she unbuttoned the coat and let it fall. The doctor's expression did not change, but his eyes widened slightly. The nurse made a small sound in her throat. Margaret stood there in her thin cotton dress, her belly enormous and unmistakable. 7 months of pregnancy on full display. She kept her eyes on the floor, her hands folded, her breathing steady. Whatever came next, she would face it. She had survived the bombing of Berlin. She had survived the Atlantic crossing. She would survive this too. No. The doctor was silent for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "How far along?" 7 months, maybe 8. Her voice was barely a whisper. Does camp administration know? No. Does anyone know? No. The doctor removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked suddenly older, wearier, as if this discovery had added years to his face. He glanced at the nurse, who was still staring at Margaret with an expression somewhere between shock and pity. "Sit down," the doctor said finally. "We need to talk." Margaret sat. Her hands found her belly again, protective, maternal. The baby kicked, as if sensing the tension. The doctor leaned back in his chair and studied her with those tired eyes. According to military regulations, pregnant prisoners of war must be reported immediately to camp administration. They are then transferred to special medical facilities for the duration of pregnancy and delivery. This is not negotiable. This is federal law. Margaret said nothing. What could she say? However, the doctor continued, and something in his tone made her look up. However, I am required to perform full examination before making my report. This examination takes time, perhaps 1 hour, perhaps 2. In that time, anything might happen. Administrative delays, paperwork errors. The military is very good at losing things in bureaucracy. He held her gaze. The nurse looked away. Margaret felt something crack open inside her chest. Hope. Dangerous, fragile hope. Why would you do this? The doctor put his glasses back on. I have 4 daughters. One of them is your age. If she were pregnant and alone in a foreign country, surrounded by enemies, I would want someone to give her 2 hours. He stood. Now, let me examine you properly. I need to make sure you and the baby are healthy. Then we will discuss what happens next. The examination took 90 minutes. The doctor was thorough, professional, gentle. He checked her blood pressure, listened to the baby's heartbeat through a stethoscope, measured her belly, asked questions about her health, her diet, her symptoms. The nurse assisted, her earlier shock replaced by clinical efficiency. Together they determined that both mother and child were surprisingly healthy, given the circumstances of the past months. You have been lucky, the doctor said when he was finished, or perhaps very strong. Most women would have miscarried during that Atlantic crossing. I am both, Margaret said. The doctor allowed himself a small smile. Then his expression grew serious again. I must report this. I have no choice, but I can file my report at end of day instead of immediately. This gives you time. Time for what? To prepare, to think, to decide how you want to proceed. He paused. There is a chaplain here, Father Donnelly, Catholic. He speaks some German. He might be able to help you navigate what comes next. I can send word to him if you wish. Margaret nodded slowly. Yes, please. The doctor made a note on his clipboard. One more thing. When I file my report, I will recommend that you remain here at Camp Huntsville rather than being transferred. The baby is too far along for transport to be safe. This may or may not be approved, but I will argue for it. Better you stay somewhere familiar than be moved again. Thank you, Margaret whispered. The words were inadequate for what he was offering, but they were all she had. "Go back to your barrack, rest. Father Donnelly will find you before dinner." The doctor stood, signaling the end of the examination. At the door, he paused and looked back at her. "What is your husband's name?" Klaus Schiller." "Where is he now?" "I do not know. Eastern Front. Missing." The doctor's expression softened. "I am sorry. War is hell for everyone." He opened the door. "Take care of yourself, Frau Schiller, and your child." Margaret walked back to the barracks in a daze, the morning sun burning down on her shoulders, the coat bundled under her arm now that there was no more point in hiding. Other women stared as she passed, their eyes dropping to her belly, their mouths forming silent questions. News would spread through the camp like wildfire. By nightfall, everyone would know. In Barrack 7, Greta was waiting. She took one look at Margaret and pulled her down onto her bunk. "Mein Gott, how long?" 7 months. "Why did you not tell anyone?" "Because I was afraid." Margaret's voice cracked. "Afraid they would take the baby. Afraid they would send me back to Germany. Afraid of everything." Greta put her arm around Margaret's shoulders. She was a large woman, solid and warm, and for the first time in months, Margaret let herself lean against someone else. Let herself be weak for just a moment. "You are not alone now," Greta said quietly. "Whatever happens, you have sisters here. We take care of each other." That evening, Father Donnelly came to the barracks just after dinner. He was younger than Margaret expected, maybe 35, with red hair going gray at the temples and a face that suggested Irish ancestry. He spoke German with an American accent, but clear enough to understand. They talked outside, in the space between the barracks where scraggly mesquite trees provided patches of shade. The sun was setting, turning the Texas sky orange and purple, and red, colors so vivid they hurt to look at. Margaret told him everything. Klaus, the pregnancy, the hiding, the examination, her fears about what would happen next. Father Donnelly listened without interruption. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, watching the sunset. Then he said, "The doctor told me he is recommending you stay here. I will support this recommendation. I have some influence with camp administration. They listen to chaplains sometimes. What will they do to me? Honestly, I do not know. This situation is unusual. Most prisoner pregnancies happen after arrival, not before. American military has regulations for everything, but this falls into gray area." He turned to look at her. "But I can tell you what will not happen. They will not harm you. They will not take your baby. They will not send you back to Germany while you are pregnant. Geneva Convention is very clear about treatment of pregnant prisoners." "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be about anything in this war." He paused. "There is another thing to consider. After the baby is born, you will have choices. You can request to stay in America as refugee. Many German prisoners are choosing this path. Your child would be born on American soil, which gives certain rights under U.S. law. It is complicated but possible." Margarete had not thought that far ahead, had not imagined any future beyond survival. "I do not know if I want to stay in America. You have time to decide, months probably. Focus on staying healthy now, delivering safely. Everything else can wait." Father Donnelly visited her 3 times a week after that. He brought books in German, magazines, sometimes chocolate from the Red Cross supplies. He talked with her about theology, about Ireland, about his own family back in Boston. He never preached or judged, just offered quiet, steady presence in a place where everything else was uncertain. The camp administration's response to the doctor's report came 2 days later. Margaret was summoned to the commander's office, a squat building near the main gate where American flags hung limp in the heat. She walked there with Greta beside her for support, both of them silent, both of them preparing for the worst. Commander Harrison was a career military man, 50s, with a face like granite and eyes that had seen too many wars. He sat behind a metal desk covered in papers and regarded Margaret with an expression that gave nothing away. "Sit," he said in English. An interpreter stood beside him. a young German-American soldier who translated everything. Margaret sat, her hands folded over her belly. Commander Harrison shuffled papers, found what he was looking for, and read aloud through the interpreter. Dr. Weinstein has filed medical reports stating that prisoner Schiller, Margaret, is approximately 7 months pregnant. He recommends prisoner remain at Camp Huntsville for duration of pregnancy, due to advanced gestational state and risks of transport. Do you confirm this information? Yes, Margaret said through the interpreter. Why did you not disclose pregnancy upon arrival? I was afraid. Of what? Of everything. She met his gaze. I am enemy prisoner. I am pregnant with enemy child. I did not know what you would do to me. Something flickered in Commander Harrison's eyes. Not quite sympathy, but not indifference either. He leaned back in his chair. Frau Schiller, I have been managing POW camps since 1943. I have seen many things, but I have never seen a woman hide 7-month pregnancy successfully for this long. That takes remarkable determination. He paused, let the interpreter catch up. You will remain at Camp Huntsville. You will be given separate quarters in medical barracks. You will be excused from work duties but required to attend daily medical checkups. When labor begins, you will be transported to civilian hospital in Huntsville under guard. After delivery, both you and infant will return to camp. These are my orders, do you understand? Relief flooded through Margaret so suddenly she felt dizzy. Yes, thank you. Do not thank me. I am following regulations. But his tone suggested otherwise. One more thing. When child is born, you must choose name and register birth. Under Geneva Convention, child will be documented as born to prisoner of war on American soil. This has implications for child's future citizenship. Father Donnelly can explain details. Dismissed. Margaret was moved to the medical barracks that afternoon. It was smaller than the main barracks, with only 10 beds, most of them empty. Her space was near a window that looked out over the scrubby Texas landscape. The nurse assigned to her was named Helen, middle-aged, efficient, with kind eyes and no German whatsoever. They communicated through gestures and broken English, and it worked well enough. The other women in camp treated her pregnancy with mixture of curiosity and protectiveness. Many of them were older, had children back in Germany, and they brought Margaret small gifts, extra food from their rations, a handmade blanket, a carved wooden toy that someone's husband had sent from another camp. They asked about Klaus, about her home, about her plans. She answered what she could and kept the rest private. September passed into October. The Texas heat finally broke, replaced by cooler nights that made sleeping possible. Margaret's belly grew enormous. The baby kicked constantly now, strong enough that others could see the movements through her dress. Dr. Weinstein checked on her twice a week, always professional, always thorough. He taught her breathing exercises for labor, explained what to expect, answered her endless anxious questions. First babies are usually late, he told her in mid-October. You have time. But the baby had other plans. Labor started on October 23rd, 3 in the morning, with a contraction so intense it woke Margaret from deep sleep. She lay there in the darkness, hands pressed to her belly, breathing through the pain the way Dr. Weinstein had taught her. When it passed, she counted seconds until the next one came. 5 minutes, then another. 4.5 minutes. She pulled herself out of bed and walked to Helen's room. The nurse took one look at her face and began moving immediately, getting dressed, calling for the guard, arranging transport. Within 30 minutes, Margaret was in the back of a military ambulance, Helen beside her, racing through the pre-dawn darkness toward Huntsville Civilian Hospital. The labor lasted 14 hours, long enough for the sun to rise, blaze overhead, and begin its descent again. Long enough for Margaret to understand why women screamed during childbirth, why her mother had called it both miracle and curse. Helen stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, speaking soothing words in English that Margaret did not understand, but found comforting anyway. Dr. Weinstein was there too, though he was not the attending physician. That honor went to Dr. Matthews, an obstetrician who had delivered half the babies in Huntsville and took the fact that his patient was a German prisoner in stride. Together, they guided Margaret through the worst pain she had ever experienced, through the urge to push, through the final impossible moments when she thought her body would split in half. And then, a cry, high and furious and absolutely alive. "It's a girl," Dr. Matthews said in English. Helen translated into German. "Ein Mädchen," a girl, Klaus's daughter, their daughter. They placed the baby on Margaret's chest, tiny and red and covered in vernix, her eyes squeezed shut, her fists waving in protest at being born. Margaret wrapped her arms around this impossibly small person and felt something shift in her universe, some fundamental reordering of priorities that had nothing to do with war or nations or anything except this child, this perfect stranger, who had lived inside her for 9 months and was now separate, real, hers. "What will you name her?" Dr. Weinstein asked. Margaret had thought about this for months, had considered family names, German names, traditional names, but lying there with her daughter in her arms, with American. Nurses moving around the room and English voices in the hallway, she realized that this child belonged to 2 worlds now, Germany and America, past and future. "Anna," she said. "Anna Clara Schiller." Anna for Klaus's mother, who had died in the Berlin bombing. Clara for her own mother, who might still be alive somewhere in the rubble of Germany. Names that would work in both languages. Names that carried memory forward. They returned to Camp Huntsville 2 days later. Margaret carried Anna wrapped in a donated blanket, holding her close against the jostling of the ambulance, whispering to her in German. Back in the medical barracks, the other German women came to see the baby, bringing more gifts, cooing over her tiny fingers and dark hair. Even the American nurses stopped by, offering advice and baby supplies from the Red Cross. Father Donnelly visited that evening. He looked at Anna sleeping in her makeshift cradle, a wooden box lined with blankets, and said a quiet prayer in Latin. Then he turned to Margaret. "She is beautiful. Congratulations." "Thank you, Father." "Have you thought about what happens next?" Margaret had thought about nothing else during the long hours of labor. "I want to stay in America. I have nothing to return to in Germany. No home, no family that I know of. And Klaus..." She could not finish the sentence. Father Donnelly nodded. "I can help with the paperwork. Refugee status is complicated but possible, especially with American-born child. It will take months, maybe a year. But I think you have good chance. What will I do? How will I live? One step at a time. First, you recover. You take care of Anna. When war officially ends and prisoners are processed for return or resettlement, we will petition for your refugee status. There are organizations that help displaced persons find work, housing, sponsors. You will not be alone." Margaret looked at Anna, at her daughter's perfect tiny face, and felt something like hope stir in her chest. Not the desperate, fragile hope of survival, but something stronger. The hope of building a life, of giving this child something better than ruins and memories. "Thank you, Father, for everything. Thank you for trusting me." He stood to leave, paused at the door. "One more thing. I sent inquiries through Red Cross about your husband. Klaus Schiller, Wehrmacht, last seen Eastern Front, nothing yet, but I will keep trying." After he left, Margaret sat by the window with Anna in her arms and watched the sun set over Texas. The sky turned those impossible colors again, orange and purple and red, colors that still hurt to look at but no longer felt foreign. Anna stirred in her sleep, made small mewing sounds, settled again. Margaret thought about Klaus, about whether he was alive somewhere, in a Soviet camp maybe, or dead in some frozen field she would never see. She hoped he was alive, hoped he would somehow find his way back to them, but hoping was all she could do now. What she knew for certain was this: she had survived. Anna had survived, and tomorrow they would wake up in America, in this strange, flat land of endless sky, and begin the long process of learning how to live again. The war in Europe officially ended on May 8, 1945, but Margaret was already in transit by then. The war in the Pacific ended in August, and Camp Huntsville began processing prisoners for return to Germany. By October 1945, when Anna was born, the world was trying to figure out what peace meant, how to rebuild, how to punish the guilty without destroying everyone. Margaret's petition for refugee status was filed in November 1945. It included letters from Dr. Weinstein, Father Donnelly, Commander Harrison, and 3 other camp staff members who testified to her character and circumstance. It included Anna's birth certificate, documenting her as born on American soil to a prisoner of war. It included a photograph, Margaret holding Anna outside the medical barracks, both of them squinting into the Texas sun. The petition was approved in March 1946. By then, Margaret had learned basic English. She had learned American customs, American food, American ways of being. She had learned that the United States was not one thing but many things, North and South, rich and poor, generous and cruel, just like Germany had been before the war broke everything. A Lutheran church in Huntsville sponsored her release from Camp Huntsville in April 1946. They provided a small apartment, helped her find work as a seamstress, connected her with other German refugees who had chosen to stay. Anna was 6 months old, healthy and loud and curious about everything. Margaret never heard from Klaus. The Red Cross searches came up empty. Father Donnelly kept trying for 2 years. But eventually, even he had to admit that Klaus Schiller was gone, lost in the vast chaos of the Eastern Front where millions of men disappeared without record. In 1948, Margaret met Thomas, a German-American carpenter whose parents had immigrated before the war. He was patient with her English, kind to Anna, willing to build a life with a woman who carried so much history. They married in 1949. He adopted Anna and gave her his last name, though Margaret kept Schiller as her middle name, a private memorial to the man who had given her this child. Anna grew up American, speaking English with just a trace of German accent learned from her mother. She never knew her biological father except through Margaret's stories. She never saw Germany until she was 25 and took a trip to find her mother's roots. By then, both Berlins, East and West, had been rebuilt, transformed, made new again. Margaret lived until 1987. She died in Huntsville, Texas, in the house Thomas had built for them, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carried both German and American blood, both histories, both futures. Her obituary in the Huntsville item was 6 lines long and mentioned that she had come to America as a prisoner of war during World War II. It did not mention the 7 months she spent hiding her pregnancy, did not mention the terror of being discovered, the kindness of strangers, the impossible choice between countries, did not mention that she had arrived in America carrying a secret that could have destroyed her and left carrying a daughter who would define the rest of her life. Some stories are too complex for obituaries, too human, too real. But they happened anyway. In Texas in 1945, under an endless sky that witnessed everything and judged nothing. Anna Schiller, later Anna Weber, graduated from the University of Texas in 1968 with a degree in nursing. She spent 40 years working in hospitals across Texas, delivering hundreds of babies, including several born to German immigrant families who had arrived after the war. She never forgot that she too had been born into complicated circumstances, that her first breath had been taken under the watch of military guards, that her mother's courage had given her a chance at life. The records of Camp Huntsville were declassified in the 1990s. Among them was Dr. Weinstein's original report from August 1945, noting the discovery of prisoner Schiller's pregnancy and his recommendation for humane treatment. Also there, Commander Harrison's order allowing her to remain at camp, Father Donnelly's letters advocating for refugee status, Nurse Helen's daily logs tracking Margaret's health through the final months of pregnancy. These documents now sit in the National Archives, part of the vast paper trail of World War II, evidence that even in the midst of global conflict, individual acts of mercy still mattered. That seeing someone as human, not just enemy, not just prisoner, but human, could change everything. If you found this story meaningful, subscribe to see more lesser-known stories from World War II. History is not just battles and politics. It is also moments like these, small decisions, quiet kindness, people trying to survive and protect what they love, even when everything else has fallen apart. These stories deserve to be remembered.